This is ECGR 6185, 8185. This is a special recorded lecture on how to review papers. Welcome out there in viewing land. For those of you students who are sitting in the class, this will be posted and you can look at it later. But more importantly, one of the classes I will, in the future, I will just not have. You'll already have been here since you were here live, and so everybody else will have to read it or view it online. The specific topic that I'm going to cover today is how to review papers. I should say how to read and review papers, and to some respect also how to write papers. So the first thing I should sit back and think about this and say, why do we do papers? So I guess the main question to ask is, why do we write papers? So, what do you think? You can have the silly as well as the altruistic definitions for these, and I can almost assure you they'll be right. Jerry, I'm going to ask you, what do you think? Why do you think?
Recognition.
Recognition? Steve?
To communicate ideas.
Communicate ideas, both very good. Aswin?
It's cool.
It's cool. All right. Cardi, you're laughing. I'll call on you. No, you gotta come up with something new. You already got that one. You got to do a new one. All right. Go ahead, Tom.
Help others with your knowledge.
Pass on knowledge.
Sharing.
Knowledge share.
Any other ones you can think of? Tenure promotion. Well, why did I write those last two here? Well, first of all, the altruistic and the real reason people write papers is, number one, to pass on, share knowledge, and communicate their ideas. What they're doing is they are identifying that they've done something, they've thought of something, they have an idea of something, and they're trying to pass on that knowledge and advance the state of the art based on what they've done. Now, there are some papers that are nothing more than what we call war stories. Hey, we did this and it worked. That's very good. There are some that are more of, here's an idea that we thought would make a process work better, would make something cheaper, would be easier, better performance, whatever. And they're taking a body of knowledge, tweaking it a little bit, and showing what their results were. Those are very good. There are some papers that are just way out there, kind of like in Einstein's original time of relativity. That's just a concept that's just so far out there that's just bizarre. And those are really interesting papers too. And papers like this are all over the place. Now, there are some side benefits. For example, faculty members, if they want to get tenure and promotion, they need to make sure that they publish their work. Part of that also, I should add, is they are mentoring I'll just call it students in general because it could be at all levels. So faculty are mentoring students. We're trying to get students to get to the point where they could be productive researchers and productive engineers. And so we will work with you to put out a paper. For example, there's a paper that you all have, which is a wireless quiz system using low-power microcontrollers, which is something that some students did here in the class, at this university. And is it something really groundbreaking? No. But part of this is they learn how to write a paper. Later on, when they look at the reviews, they'll say, and this is what the reviewer said about the paper. So part of that is also teaching you, mentoring students, which in some cases, a written publication is required for you to get your master's excuse me, and PhD degree. It just chokes me up to think about it. And of course, in the end, having your name on a paper is cool, right? And you get recognition for that. Yeah, good answer. All right, so from that respect then, well, I'll also have to say why we write papers. And along that same lines is why are papers published? And from, if you look at the above, the concepts of all of the above, but another reason, and I almost hate to say this, but it happens more often than not. What do you think? Make money. Because in this world, usually knowledge is power, and knowledge is also, you can sell knowledge for money. So, for example, the IEEE publishes many conference proceedings, many journals, all of those are paid for. And usually the publications arm of any organization like the ACM, the IEEE, the ASPE, etc., make money. Everything else costs money, but publications make money. So part of the service to members is to provide vehicles for people to write, and oh, by the way, they make money, which will support the other activities for the members. However, that should not be your idea on how to do or why you should publish, because rarely does a person actually make money when they write papers. There are some exceptions. For example, if you write for a magazine like Circuit Seller Inc., I believe I was paid $75 a page for writing an article for Circuit Seller Inc. There was another one, Robot Science and Technology. I think they actually paid me $25 a page, plus they gave me a free subscription to the magazine for a year. Ooh-ah. So, in some cases, an author will make money. Rarely does an author make money for writing papers. If you are a publisher for a book, or if you are an author of a book that is published, usually you do make a little bit of money on the book, anywhere between 5 and 15% of the sales price. So, for example, I have 3 books out right now, and 2 of them are end of life. 1 is approaching end of life, meaning they're not going to sell anymore. So, for each one of these books that sold, I made maybe 10% of the sales price that it was sold to for Amazon. And as it turned out, the sales price to Amazon was like $10 to $15. So I made $1 a book. Ooh, not even close to the amount of time, or worth the amount of time. But again, why did I write? Not necessarily to make money, but to pass on, share knowledge, because it was cool. Oh well, so be it. So you have to think about the world of papers and conference papers and journal papers. And I'm going to concentrate on conference papers because we're going to be reviewing a conference paper for this, for one of the assignments. So on the back of one of the handouts that you got when you walked in over here, if you didn't get one of these handouts, now's the time to come grab it while we're starting up. Turn to the last page. And this is a general description of conference paper publishing timeline. So if you think about the world of publishing, you should think about actually what happens. in all of the process. So if we're looking at all of the process, we have the following. By the way, I made 10 copies, and I should have only like 2 or 3 left. Apparently I have a lot more. Oh, you know what? There are 2 versions of this. I'm sorry. One is how to review a technical paper, so make sure to get one of those if you didn't get one yet. In fact, I'll just pass them out. And then the other is a little description on some evaluations. So. So this is at the back of, this is why you were looking at me funny. This is at the back of the one you just got, all right? So, paper publishing timeline. There are some conferences that are held at the exact same time every year. Sometimes these conferences change location. Sometimes they're in the exact same place. There was a conference that I attended in the late 80s, early 90s, that always appeared at about the same time in the summer, about like the first week in August, and always was held in the same hotel in the same city every year that it was held. The reason being is that organizing a conference is really difficult, and if you have to find a new place every year, you have to retrain everybody who's working on it, and so it's a lot easier just to go to the same place. So, give you an example. Conference organizers creates a call for papers. And that could occur anywhere from 18 months to 10 months before a conference is supposed to occur. The call for papers will be published in various and assorted places. They could go out on the web. Most of them go out on the web. Personal emails. They can go to nice, pretty posters, which are sent to lots and lots of departments all over the world. They could end up inside of magazines. But very often, these call for papers are actually put on the web and emailed. And during that time, maybe you decide that it's time for you to write a paper, because you have enough work to be done. And so, from this case, the call for papers is out, and you identify that your work is ready for publication in a conference. Now, for example, if we look at the paper that we're going to review in a few minutes, a wireless quiz system, I knew that the call for papers was out there because I wrote it. It was out approximately 18 months before it was due. No, actually it was out a year before the papers were due. And I only knew at the beginning of November that this work would actually be really good for publication in a paper. I think that was about the time I asked you guys to think about it, right? And because their solution looked pretty good. And so they identified their work was ready, and they wrote an abstract. And then they started working on the first draft, the second draft, the third draft. And what will typically happen is that if you have several people on a paper, and if we take this example here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 people on the paper, you will have a paper written in the first draft, and maybe it's only a page with the abstract, and it looks like it has some outline associated with it, and it has some other materials. And people will look at it, and then you'll write a second draft, and there'll be some more refinement, and then you'll do a third draft, and then maybe the main professor will take it and scrub it and make sure it's nice and clean, and then go and submit it. Now, almost exclusively now, people do not send hard copies of papers anywhere when they're done. Everything is created electronically. So usually a PDF is made of the file, and the PDF is loaded to a website, and that's how you submit the paper. You submit other information too. But So far, no money transactions or no money changes hands. You submit a paper to a website saying, all right, here we go. I'm ready, I'm happy. Now the conference takes over, and by the way, they wait until the deadline for the paper. And sometimes the deadline is extended because they don't get enough papers and they just need some more papers. So what they'll do is they'll say, oh, we'll extend the deadline for this conference by another 2 weeks. Or I'm part of a conference program committee that has added a month onto the deadline because they have only 20 papers and they wanted 40. For Southeast Con, we got 169 papers, which is pretty good. We got an awful lot from this university, but we got a lot from the Southeast. We even got some from as far as India and Hong Kong. So there are lots of publishers, or I should say lots of authors that are looking at our conference, and I'll describe why our conference is valuable when I get to the end. So the deadline comes, and so within 2 days, there was a list of reviewers that had been selected beforehand. In other words, there were 100 people from across the region and state who said, we will review these papers. And the papers were reviewed by the technical program chair. So the papers went out to the reviewers, and they said, okay, reviewers, I want you to review this paper. And here are the guidelines that I want you to review, and please have your reviews done by this date. Reviews are done all electronically. So again, you go to a website, you grab a copy of the paper. If you want it electronically only, you could read it. Or if you grab the PDF and print it out, then you have that. Then you take a look at the paper. You judge it based on several different criteria. You write a report on it, submit the report via electronic means, and then at that point, by the deadline, the technical program chair will look at all the reviews that come in and judge whether this paper has good content to be in this conference. And if it is, you get an acceptance. If it's not, you get a rejection. And there's no second chance. They cannot actually allow you a chance to change the paper and have it reviewed because the deadlines are so short. So, once you have been, or if you have been successful and it is accepted, then you have a little bit of time to actually take this final draft over here and to do the really, really, really final. So you have this really, really final draft of the paper, which might be maybe changes including typos, correcting something that you said inside. So you can imagine if your paper is really rough and really tough to read and doesn't convey very much, that they'll just reject it because there's no chance that this thing is ever going to be cleaned up in a short amount of time. Nobody's going to have a chance to review it. But most papers that are accepted only need minor changes, and really there's nobody there to check to make sure that it's done. With the exception of a couple conferences will do that. So you modify it, you create a PDF, and you upload it to the paper website again. And with the IEEE, there's a special facility website called IEEE Express that you submit your MS Word document or LaTeX file or whatever. And they will actually generate the PDF because eventually all these papers will be put into the IEEE database. And they want to make sure that they're correctly formatted and correctly, or the fonts are such that all the fonts are readily available. The paper won't look like garbage when it's up there. By the way, you also have to register for the conference because conferences make money by attendees being there. They now have gone to a policy of requiring that you register at the same time that you submit your final version that's been accepted. So, for example, the Southeast Con conference coming up costs $300 for a paper to be published. That includes the registration for the author, that includes publishing, and in the case of our conference, a couple of meals are included as well. So the authors, or the conference organizers, by the way, I should probably held this or put it in here, will actually create a compact disc. So I should have added on here, create a CD and sometimes a hard copy Proceedings. Proceedings is the publication for the conference of all the papers that were accepted and will be presented at the conference. In that time, you're expected to not only, after you've registered for the conference, make travel arrangements for getting there, you'll spend time making a presentation, because usually you're allocated anywhere between 15 and 30 minutes to talk about your work and answer questions that people might have. The more rigorous a conference, the better focused the questions are. And in fact, depending on the work that you do, you may have a lot of very, very, very pointed questions. People who are not convinced of your approach and convinced of your research will actually grill you on specific things. And this is a conference, or conferences that are very focused, often are ones where great ideas actually come out of the discussion between the author and people in the audience. For general conferences like Southeast Con, usually there's just a couple of polite questions and then they move on to the next subject because it's not very focused. So then you attend the conference and present your work. Usually you stay in the conference hotel or maybe the cheaper one nearby, you never know. Now shortly after that, the conference CD, minus people who didn't show up to the conference and make the presentation, because if you don't show up and make the presentation, they will pull a paper out of the conference. What they will do is they will send that information into the IEEE for posting on the IEEE Explorer database. Now, we have one person in here from civil engineering that would be equivalent to your professional organization's paper database. I think it's the ASCE or something like that. So this is the general timeline of how a paper is written, reviewed, accepted, published, and actually shows up in the real world. Now once it shows up in the IEEE Explorer, every paper is now searchable. So if you go online and you're looking at an example, I will go to the IEEE Explorer database. One way we have to do this is, by the way, I'm assuming everybody knows that if you go to the library and you go to articles and papers, you can actually get access to all of the IEEE papers. Everybody knew that, right? Yes? And the same thing with a lot of other CEs. Yeah, Steve's not saying anything. It's like, oh, wow. Okay, so if you go here, here is the IEEE Explorer database. So let's say I'm doing some basic investigation on a quiz system. I have no idea if this will show anything up. But I can do a search on papers on a quiz system. And let's see, multimedia online quiz system, multiple quiz system and shared display. Most of these are associated with the educational conferences. Well, how many papers did I have here? Usually it tells you how many papers you have. 7 papers of 2.5 million total documents. Mobile phones into a mobile, interesting. But some of the work that they did on a small little quiz buzzer system is not in here. If it was, they could have looked at it. The other thing you could do is you could look at people who are authors. So if we want to look for, there's another search one here, author search. If you wanted to look for the author's name, I believe Conrad, comma, J, and I want to look at everybody from, the year 2008. See how many Conrad, comma, J's in 2008. That would be me, most likely, and some other people who actually write in the field. 84 matches? Oh. There's a researcher in Power called J.R. Conrad. So, there we go. You know what? This didn't work correctly because it found something in 2005. It was only supposed to look for, oh, you know what? Up to 2005. Let me go back. From the year, 2008 to present. So I went the wrong way, sorry. All right, so here are a total of 5 papers that were published last year and this year, and look at this. J.J. Zacharias had a Southeast Con paper in 2008. Jerry, there's your paper.
Yay.
Yay, he says. Will that get you tenure?
I don't know. Should be.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, so let's look at that. We have one that was published at Southeast Con this year, one at Southeast Con last year, and actually I was looking for one called Mascots, which did not make it yet. So there's a conference that I had a paper in September that still isn't up on IEEE Explorer. It's actually kind of late compared to when it should be. So, since you're a student at UNC Charlotte, you can actually go and take a look at the full text of the paper. So you can click on the PDF that's posted in the paper database, and oh, by the way, IEEE Explorer, if you print it, will put this header on it saying, yes, this is how you got it, where you got it from. If you look at each paper, at the bottom, it's just not on here. Oh, they didn't put it on here. This is not a good example. I'll take another one where they did it correctly. At the bottom of the paper, what they should do is they should add a little bottom part of this, which says, oh, this is the copyright information, and if you're not in academia or you don't have readily access to these, you can pay $25 to get a copy of this paper. Do I see any of this? No, because when you write a conference paper or a journal paper, usually you turn over the copyright of that paper to IEEE or whomever. So it's IEEE who actually will make the $25 per copy if somebody buys a copy of that paper. That's why IEEE and all those other organizations do not like it when people post papers like this out onto the web for anybody to go and grab, which, by the way, is easy to do. So if I were to look at in Google, if you go to Google Scholar and you look for there's another Zacharias out there. If you look for Conrad Zacharias, what's another word that we should use? I did spell your last name right, correct? Mm-hmm. Embedded. Here we come across 2 papers in particular, or one in particular. Here it is, A Survey of Digital Signal Processing Education is a paper that Jerry Mosley wrote 2 years ago. And if I were to look at all 2 versions of this, where they exist, one of them is at COE, should be out there. It's out there, all right, shame on me. I'll have to take that off. But then there will also be this one through IEEE Explorer. They'll give you a copy of it, of the abstract, but you really need to by the text of it, unless, oh, look at this. It is identified that I'm at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. UNC Charlotte has bought a full subscription to the IEEE database papers. So they pay, I don't know, somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000 a year for that privilege. So that's another way that IEEE makes money. So, let's take a look at how you will review papers. So if you pull out the sets of information, I think somebody took my one with all the pages. So it is the this one that says IEEE Southeast Con Review Entry Form. So if you go ahead and pull that one out. If you go to the database for reviewing papers, and do you want me to go and show you an example of how to do that? No, or you just want to do it on paper? Your choice. Online? All right, let's go online. So if I go to the Southeast Con database for the paper submission, you actually go to a separate, come on. A separate page, a separate website. Oh, this thing is, it's a lot. So it's going to go to a separate place. I actually need to go and get my information about where this is, or what my password is, because I have no idea what my password is. So don't go looking at my personal emails here. Oh, I know how to fix that. There we go. Wow, I had a phone call. All I have is a phone call since I came down here. That's amazing. So usually what will happen is that when you are a reviewer for a paper, they'll say, hey, you're going to get some papers to review. And then you'll get in the mail, hey, here's your user ID and here's your password for reviewing these papers. So don't look at that. So I'll go over here. Oops. They're over here. So it was JCONRAD 62. Some password for reviewing. Now it says start here to start review. You memorized that password anyhow, didn't you? Smart Alec. All right. So these are all my papers that I've been given to review. And as it turns out, I was given so many papers because I wanted to have students do reviews of these papers. So if I'm going to review a paper, here's what I would do. I would go to the Enter, Edit, Review, and this is all pretty easy. Oh, don't tell me it's going to pop up for you, all right? And in this situation, here I have a pull-down menu of something to take a look at. Now, as it turned out, this was a silly paper that we just put in there to test the system. So if I were to go on here and look at what's here, I would click the icon to download the paper. So I click on it, and here's the contents of the paper. If I had a real paper, it would show up a real paper there, all right? So we just did this to test the system out. So I went, and here is how I review something. I have a pull-down menu, simply accept, marginal, reject, reject. What is my confidence? In other words, how much do you know about this subject? If this is an area in embedded systems, you should have some average to high knowledge of this. And some of you may have highest as well. Relevance of this paper to the conference and to the area. Is it really good? This is often difficult to identify which would be but the relevance is how important is this paper? How original is the work? In other words, is this really novel, or is this just kind of like a repeat of what's been done before? Technical correctness. How is the English? How is the research? How is the organization? Is it easy to read? Well, I'm sorry, technical correctness will be of the technical aspects. Is it technically correct? The next one is the clarity of the paper. Is it easy to read? How's the English? Is it really difficult to read because the English is poor and the spelling is poor and the organization, they don't follow the format? What about references? Do they reference lots and lots of useful papers, lots of previous work, or are they just ignoring it all? And then, does this paper need to be edited? How much changing needs to go on, or how much changing do the authors need to do on this paper to make it a decent, presentable paper? This is where you have to actually recommend or provide some additional information. Here, comments to the author could be anywhere between a paragraph to pages. Now, I'm going to ask that when you do reviews for the papers that have been assigned, that you at least do a fairly decent paragraph. This is something that will be viewed by the author. So if it's going to be accepted, you really need to provide to the author some good information about, oh, here's this paragraph didn't make sense, it's not clear, maybe you should look at this. You don't really need to go so far as to say, on page 4, third column down, you have a typo, you needed to say what, and instead you said where. All right, you don't need to go that far. However, you should say that there are typos everywhere. You really need to go through this carefully if there are a lot of typos. This section right here, comments to the program committee. Provided that that you've reviewed this and you feel strongly one way or the other, comments to the program committee should be fairly short, maybe a line or two, if needed at all. For example, if this was truly a horrible paper, the author should be ashamed of himself. This should be for. So, this is another thing we're talking about. For submitting such tripe. Do you know what tripe is, by the way? I think tripe is sheep intestines, all right? So in other words, this paper, which was just a test paper, for fun I said, this is horrible. These comments are only seen by the technical chair, people who will look at the reviews and accept or not accept. It's not seen by the author ever. So most of you won't even need to write anything here, but if you have a paper that just is so bad that you think the program committee should say, do not accept it whatsoever, this is absolutely horrible, that's where you would write it. However, if you see a paper that is really good, you could say in here, this stuff is really bizarre, but I think it looks really innovative, and I may not be the strongest reviewer of this, but this stuff I think could be really, really good if published. Then that's where you say stuff like that. This is a fairly easy conference to do a review for because you only have one space where you actually have to put in written comments. I've worked with some conferences that for every single one of these scoring characteristics, you would have to write a paragraph. And they would actually require you to write at least 20 words. And they would check it to make sure you had 20 words. So, this is a fairly easy one to review for. However, I want you to make sure that you actually do a fairly decent review of writing. All right? So, once this is all filled out, then you submit the review. It has been, it's going to close. And here's my list of papers that I need to review. So you notice right here I have a lot of these which are red boxed in, meaning that I have to still write the review. So I would know that I'm going to have to go into this one, for example, and enter a review for this. Now this, again, I have to pop up the window. So in this paper, I will actually, here it gives me the initial form. Here's the paper ID, some information about it, and then I need to actually fill in everything. All right, so what I have given to you is a copy of what this review thing looks like, so you have an idea of what it comes out. But also, all of you have been sent via email a MS Word file. This MS Word file has all of these review characteristics, or what is the word I'm looking for? Criteria. All the criteria and the different levels. All right. So when you're going to review, what you have to do is you have to, in this one line here, it says decision, recommendation, accept, marginal, reject, reject. What I would like you to do is just erase all the ones except for the one that you want. So if you think it should be marginal, accept, you're going to erase accept, marginal, reject, and reject. For the confidence level of your decision, highest, high, average, low, lowest, just put the one that you have for your confidence. All the way through major revisions, none, major, minor. Make sure you put those in there as well. Then, in the MS Word file, put in here the typing, the discussion, the text of how you reviewed, or what you reviewed on the paper, and what should be included in the review that goes to the author, and then the one that goes to the program committee. Now, the big question here is, how do we score this stuff? What comments do you include to the authors? And that's where the exercise we're going to do right now for the next 15 minutes is going to happen. So, in one of these handouts that I provided, by the way, is something that somebody wrote on how to review a technical paper. And this gives you a nice little idea of some guidelines that this person has for reviewing a technical paper, which, by the way, is really good for how to write a technical paper. Because if these are good practices for reviewing a paper, what to look for, what to identify, obviously, if you followed those, you would have good writing for papers. So, let's take a look at a paper that has been written. Now, this is a wireless quiz system using low-power microcontrollers. This was written by two people who are sitting here, and a third person who contributed some, but not as much as you two, right? Who wrote most of it? Was it you, or both of you, or? He's being humble back there. I bet you he did a lot, right? Yeah. Okay, good. So, one thing I should say is that when you're reviewing a paper, or when you're reviewing anything, whether it be code, a paper, or anything like that, you actually have to divorce yourself, or remove yourself from saying that this piece of work embodies you. This paper here, written by several people, is not you. It's your work. All right? So when people say, this is not clear, I don't understand this, this is, this could be cleaned up here, this could be cleaned up here, the people who wrote the paper sometimes say, oh, this is a personal attack on me, since this is me. Well, in the engineering world, this happens all the time. It's called code reviews, design reviews, and other types of reviews on things you produce. You have to keep in mind that we're being objective, and that's the nice thing about being an engineer is typically we're thick-skinned and we don't really care, too much because we realize that this is not us. All right, this is just some work that we did. But there are some people that take a lot of ownership. Now, along the same lines, if you are the reviewer, you need to be, that's the best way to put it, polite. All right? So, for example, I worked with somebody who had this nasty habit of just tearing into people and looking at this and saying, oh, I can't believe you did this. That's absolute crap. Only an idiot would do that. Well, you're not going to make any friends in the review by doing that. And by the way, this is crap, and I can't believe anybody would do it, is really an opinion. It's not objective. It's not focused on the material. So make sure that when you review something, you're focused and you're looking at the material. So when we review, and for that matter, when we write, there are some aspects that are really important in a paper. So what do you think is really important in a paper? So if you were to look at this paper, what do you think are some of the most important features, specifically in content, of the paper? What do you think is the most important one? Come on, Jerry, you already know the answer to this one. All right, abstract. Do you think it's most important?
Yes.
No. I think it's the second most important. What do you think the most important is?
Key.
The what?
Title.
The title. Because if you don't have a good title that actually describes succinctly the importance of the paper, or for that matter, the importance of the abstract, nobody's going to read the abstract. All right? So the next important thing is the abstract, as you mentioned, because it embodies the contents of the entire paper and why it's important, what's valuable about it. What do you think number 3 is?
Introduction. Conclusion.
Ooh, conclusion. And we had introduction. Notice I have some spaces in there. And this order of importance is actually my own bias, but we'll see if you can agree after I talk to you about it.
Keywords.
Keywords. Say that again?
Overview.
Overview is pretty much the abstract.
Results. Oh, yeah.
I'll call conclusions results. So what's left?
Body.
Main body.
The main body. All right, let's think about this. There are literally thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of papers published every year. And there's no way you're going to actually go through all of those papers. So what you need to do is you need to identify the most important ones in your field. How do you do that? You use search engines, right? Search engines look for what? The title, the abstract, the keywords. So if you do a search, it's most likely going to search the title, the abstract, and the keywords. You're going to be given a list of titles for the paper. Oh, you know what? I forgot one in here. That hurt. So you have title, abstract, keywords, and authors very often which are searched. You know that there are a certain number of authors that are good in that one field. For example, I know in the field of small miniature Staccato robotics that James Conrad is one of the preeminent authors of small little walking stick robots. I know that if I'm going to be looking at field programmable gate arrays being used to create computer architectures, that Ron Sass will be a very big name in that area. I know that if I'm looking at constraint satisfaction, that Rena Dechter is going to be one of the big people in that field. So, authors are a way to confirm that there's a very good paper, but still, search engines, you're looking at the title when it comes up with a list of titles. You're looking at the abstract if the title looks good. Because notice in search engines, you have readily access to the title, the abstract, the authors. Sometimes keywords if they actually have them. And then you have to buy the paper to get all the other ones. So the other thing, let's look at that. Conclusions, results. And by the way, this it's a toss-up between conclusions, results, and references to see which is more important. If a paper is worthwhile, it will actually recognize that there's been good research done earlier by other people. So if it has good references, in other words, people who are experts in the field, that means that you recognize what is good research and you're expanding upon what they've done in the past. If you totally ignore what anybody else has done, there's a real good chance that what you've done is just a repeat of what somebody else has done 10 years ago or N years ago. And also conclusion results are telling you, okay, these are the important things of this research. These are important things of this implementation. This is why it's important in the world. Finally, the introduction is more important than the rest of the body because you set up the problem. Still going, right? Okay. So, let's take a look and review this paper, specifically a wireless quiz system using low-power microcontrollers. And let's look at each of the parts of this and we see if they're important. So, by the way, how many of you actually read this paper? All right. Yeah, you don't raise your hand and you wrote it. I wrote it, so I know it. Okay, so at least we can talk about this. Look at the title. Does the title actually say what the body of the paper is and why it's important? All right? There's some key things here to look at. Wireless, low-power microcontrollers. This is ancillary. Ancillary meaning that you have a wireless, low-power microcontroller application. By the way, the big thing is low power is now big. So this is going to be a paper that will be searched if somebody is looking for low power and wireless. Low power wireless. All right? Now let's look at the next thing, is the abstract. I'm going to have to dial in on this one. By the way, the format of this paper is a standard IEEE format. It is 2-column, 9-point font. Very easy to read for those of you that have reading glasses, that have high magnification. But you could actually stuff a lot of words into those 4 pages. All right, so it builds up the problem. Multi-participant quiz game shows player selection system. Equipped with selection button placed in front of them, which can be used to give a response. Determines a group that gives the first response. Today our wired systems consume a considerable amount of power. A robust wireless using low power, etc. All right? Does the abstract convey everything that the paper includes, or is it missing anything? It's missing some of the aspects of the keywords. I would agree with you on that. Did you just make that realization, or you're... I mean, let's put it this way. My name's on the paper too, and I reviewed it. And in retrospect, I think it probably would have been good to actually add another line or two discussing the implementation of it. For example, that it is using the MSP 430, which 430F2274, which has with it a CC2500 wireless device. This device is an IEEE, this should be IEEE 802.15.4 because that's the standard. Communications stack, but it's not Zigbee. You could actually put that later in the paper, but it doesn't matter if it's Zigbee or not. All right. The other thing it also doesn't say is how successful it is. So the results are not included in that. One thing that also might be good if you wrote it in here is to talk about performance. How much does it draw? How long would you expect this device to work based on the current consumption and average everyday use and the size of batteries? That might be something good to put up there. I don't think that's even in the body of the paper, is it? Yeah, this was kind of put up there before the project was done. Actually, the project's not done yet. It has to be built, but it's been prototyped. The final system has to be built. And so that's going to be one thing that probably should be looked at over the course of the time of this. All right, what's the next thing we said was important is the keywords. Looks like your thought on the keywords. Did you say very nice or fairly nice?
Sufficient.
Sufficient? Actually, I think the keywords are very good. They are specific and concise and descriptive. All right, so let's look at the authors. Well, you know what? We can't change that. The authors are who the authors are. Are they important?
No.
But here's one thing to think about, too, is when you start publishing, it's usually good to keep the same name. This is tough for women who get married and change their name from one name to another. Customary in the U.S. that a woman changes her last name to match her husband's name, which means that if you are publishing papers and then you change your name, you know, sometimes there's a disconnect between this. But the same could be true is if you have some papers which are submitted as Suraj Swami and some that are published as Suraj G. Swami. Or for that matter, if you were somebody who didn't go by your first name, S. What's your middle name? Guru?
Gurushan.
What?
Gurushan.
Gurushan? S. Gurushan Swami. Because there are some people I know that go by G.B. Gehring or G. Bruce Gehring. And sometimes it shows up as Greg.B. Gehring. And so you got to keep a consistent name. So all of my publications say James M. Conrad. Because you noticed earlier when I did a search, I got James R. Conrad as one of the other people. By the way, that should run for an hour and 15 minutes, and I've got another 10 minutes to go, right?
12 minutes.
Pardon me?
12 minutes.
Yep, sure. So let's look at the next part, conclusion results. So if we go to the conclusion and results, it basically is a recap of what the paper says. Successful development and implementation of a wireless quiz system, inexpensive by means of a low-cost microcontroller. Battery life can be enabled by extending the power-saving modes in the microcontroller. So, these are conclusions and future work for that question, or are you just stretching? All right. So, actually, a little bit of that information, maybe a line of it, could be actually pulled into the abstract when you actually talk about your results and successes. Any other comments on the conclusion?
If it was developed, then we could have included the test results.
And that's one thing to think about over the break, right? You could actually implement it still with a prototype and do a little bit of measurement just to see how much it draws and how long it'll take until it runs out. Because you could power it with a power supply. which will tell you how much milliamps it consumes. And then based on a battery life of a certain number of milliamp hours for a AA battery, I think it uses, then you could say how long it's going to last. AAA.
It's
And
AA.
some A. I
It's
sure hope it matches what
bigger
was
number.
Sure hope it matches what we wanted to order with. Well, actually, it doesn't matter. It's whatever you got is what you get, right? All right. So, what else are we going to look at? Conclusion or references. So, if you look at the references for this, they did a reference for, very good, one of my papers. Always good to reference one of my papers. And here's another one of wireless sensor networks, a book, a couple of data sheets, which is fine, and then a tool guide. So, about the only thing missing here is any past work of a small sensor network. So maybe if they added another paper about a sensor network that used the MSP430, that might be worthwhile. Or for that matter, any other paper, any other sensor. And that's something that could be easily searched on, what do you call it, on IEEE Explorer. Or for that matter, there are other faculty here that actually have wireless sensor network papers, including one that I have, or two that I have submitted to the same conference. You could, by the way, reference another paper at the same conference. So that's one thing you could do. All right, so what's the next thing we review? And that is the introduction. So let's pull up the introduction. And this basically builds up the problem and has the motivation. So in this, I would say the introduction is split into two parts. One is why you want to do it, and the motivation is a little bit more detail. So I think in this case, introduction and motivation is pretty close to the same content. What about any other comments from you folks here? No? Tough crowd, huh?
Do we even need to tell a better technical solution to this?
All right, you need to include the technical solution in the introduction. And the answer to this is not your solution, but maybe earlier approaches or other approaches that people have done.
Okay.
And this is where you would put in, this could be introduction and motivation for a single section. And then in this initial section, or maybe in a section, if this were introduction and motivation, and then towards the end of this, you would have other approaches, is another section where you would say, in this system they did this, in this system you do this. Typically in systems you do this, and typically in systems you do this. In other words, some justification of what the body of knowledge is. You have to recognize, in a paper, you usually have to recognize what the body of knowledge in that area is. And that's where you can actually reference, in this case, what are the references from? It's from a wireless industrial sensor network paper and a book. So this is where you would actually reference those two things, which I'm looking through here and I don't see the actual reference in this. So, somewhere in the paper you actually need to talk about previous. And when you talk about the previous, then you could make references to some of the papers or books that you have looked at to draw some of this information. And again, inside the body of the paper, you would do like a bracket 1, 2. And then the final thing to review here is the body of the paper. And, we can go into the body of the paper and kind of dig it up, or we could just say that's it. So what do you want to do? Say that's it?
5 minutes too.
That's right. All right, so since nobody is wanting to go into it in great detail, we will finish up with this review. So, again, when you are reviewing the paper and reviewing papers in general, you need to write some of these comments that we said. For example, one of the comments would have been, the abstract doesn't include what the solution materials were. Or it would have been nice in the paper if they included performance measurements to let us know how valuable this is. Or you could have said they didn't analyze previous examples of wireless sensor networks to see how this relates to the state of the art. Or it didn't include, another comment could be references are at the end, but they're not used inside the body of the paper. So these would be things that you would type up and put in the article. All right. Any other questions before we call it a day? All right. Thank you very much. You can turn that off. You just stop recording and then turn it off.